Good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit, hopefully it's it's a little bit in front of what Nigel's talked about and a little bit behind, the reason why we build, and the reason why we build Tool and what that says about branding and how we talk about buildings, but also a little bit at the end about the nuts and bolts of selling and the nuts and bolts of marketing. I think that you look at that slide and you look at a lot of the presentations that we've had here and we're going to have, there's something special about building Tool, and throughout human history we've wanted to do it, and every time technology has allowed us to, we've gone that little bit taller, that little bit bigger, that little bit more special, and that little bit more iconic. And really, it all happens in the places where the concentration of money, expertise, and ambition is at its greatest. And for most of the last century, that's been in America. The history of the tall building is mostly American. The desire to grow bigger, taller, and more spectacular mirrored exactly America's socio-economic trajectory during the 20th century's Gilded Era. Today, super tall buildings are much more common. Their spread mirroring the strength and importance of the emerging economies in the East. Last year saw the completion of more tall buildings than any other year in history. And although they weren't exclusively in the Far East, that's where the race is most competitive. From Dubai to Hong Kong and Guangzhou to Mumbai, super tall buildings are marking the claims of an increasing number of growing economies, proclaiming their wealth, ambition, and expertise to the world. Now, as a specialist communications company focused on real estate and architecture, particularly tall buildings, we've worked all over the world on some of the tallest and most prestigious schemes. We have had the opportunity to study the specific issues, challenges, and opportunities in selling tall buildings. We first worked on Taipei 101. The stated intention of the government, the developer, and the architect was to bring Taipei to the world. There was no comment about shortage of office space in a dense and overcrowded city. This was about staking Taipei's claim as a financial center within Asia. It was about marking Taipei on the map. It was about making a statement about Taiwan and what Taiwan was achieving and going to achieve in the future. This was about a country, not just about office space, although that was obviously a big part of what was being produced there. When we worked on ICC and with Nigel in Hong Kong, with Sun Hung Kai, promoting the building that stands across Victoria Harbour from IFC, it was promoted as the gateway to China. And this was we called it our postcard image. It said something about the way in which people would not only view Hong Kong, but where they would view Hong Kong from. It would change the way the people viewed Hong Kong. And I think that the gateway to China message says something about Hong Kong's post-colonial future. It was about a relationship to China. It was about a relationship to the rest of Asia and marking out Hong Kong's ambition to still be the center of financial services in Asia, but particularly that relationship into mainland China. And that was a statement of intent about Hong Kong, just as much as it was about Kowloon and about ICC's position within Hong Kong. And I think that that's the thing. These buildings are statements of intent that brand cities and their countries as much as they do the buildings themselves. And this is one of the things to remember about selling tall buildings. They aren't just owned by the developer and the tenant like a normal building. They are owned by everyone. They belong to the residents of that city and to the people of that country. They are symbols that affect almost everyone. Now, I'm very fond of this slide because I really believe that the Gherkin was instrumental in London being successful in the bid to host the London 2012 Olympic Games. Up until the completion of the Gherkin, or 30 St Mary Axe as it's more properly known, London had a 1970s skyline dominated by the NatWest Tower, as you see there on the left. The rest of the UK's globally recognised architecture was Victorian, Georgian, Baroque, or Norman. London looked out of date. And then this curvaceous, futuristic rocket ship appeared in the city, and suddenly London looked modern. The building has taken on a significance far beyond its floor area or its many tenants. It has become one of the symbols that represent the London of the 21st century, in the same way that the Shard will continue to do in the future, and for that matter, any of the other buildings that are under construction or about to become reality. And here you can see on the left-hand side, 122 Leadenhall by Richard Rogers for British Land in Oxford. On the right-hand side, 20 Fenchurch Street by Raphael Vanoli for Land Securities in Canary Wharf. And in the middle, the planning permission went in last week for 52 Lime Street for W.R. Berkeley by KPF. And here you can see for another view, another KPF building, the Pinnacle in the middle there. And I think that Now, already that change from that historic city based on a medieval street pattern into something which really represents vitality and excitement and a modern outlook on architecture and the city. And of course, the symbolism and meaning of these buildings do not necessarily enjoy universal acclaim. Since the economic crisis, some critics, including the most recent Lord Mayor of London, Alderman David Wootton, that is not to be confused with the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, the Lord Mayor of London, have suggested that the Shard is out of keeping with the spirit of the age, that environmentally, economically, and bizarrely, even morally, the Shard is out of touch. The fact that this statement and criticism can be levelled at a building is extraordinary, particularly when it's being levelled by a man whose first day at work is in a gilded coach flanked by pikemen and musketeers, but it demonstrates the symbolic power and visibility of the tall building. Now, perhaps this negativity is a particularly British sentiment. In New York, where I've been working on One World Trade Center's branding for the last 3 years, the symbolism of the tower, representing the indomitable nature of the human spirit in the face of both terrorism and economic woes, is exactly what underpins the popularity of the building. The recent press coverage of the moment at which the building became the tallest structure on the New York skyline was not because of the engineering feat, which is extraordinary in itself, the fact that this building has come out of this enormous hole in the ground, 13 different construction projects, 2 railway lines operating through the site 24 hours a day within one of the most congested cities in the world, but because of the fact that this represented a city picking itself up, dusting itself off, and holding its head high. And when Michelle and Barack Obama visited the site last month, this is what Barack Obama wrote on the topping out beam. We remember, we rebuild, we come back stronger. And that is a representation of what that building stands for. That building is an historic, a symbolic structure within New York. It's much more than just office space, and I believe that only really tall buildings and iconic buildings can do that. And what will Shanghai Tower do for Shanghai? Well, for one, the name is meaningful. This is not a monument to a developer, but to a city that is representing the economic power and aspiration of a whole country, and a country that is experiencing the same levels of growth that characterized the Gilded Era in the United States when they were leading the world in tall. Shanghai Tower also has to be the standard bearer for a country that has more tall buildings under construction than anywhere else in the world. So how can a tall building be symbolic when it is in a forest of tall buildings? Obviously, it either needs to be taller than all of the others, or it needs to represent something else, some greater feat, some extra benefit. Shanghai Tower addresses this by promoting the environmental, the social, and the communal features of the building. But also it is a building that is in appearance soft and anthropomorphic, in contrast to the hypodermic Burj Khalifa. It represents the collective aspirations of a people rather than the dynastic aspirations of an absolute monarchy. It represents the unstoppable march of a third of the world's population, a swirling waterspout propelled upwards through sheer force of will. These tall buildings, however, and of course, are the acceptable face of progress. They make the perfect picture postcard image. Unfortunately, there is often a more complex side to the creation of these megastructures, especially in developing countries. Namely, poor working conditions, negligible health and safety procedures, and little consideration for the rights and well-being of the worker. Also, construction quality can be hard to maintain, and there is always the issue of the wider environmental issues relating to meteoric economic growth in developing countries. And this points to a particularly important issue relating to tall buildings, particularly in communication terms, and that of sustainability and appropriateness. And I put up Taipei 101 because it had a massive program of retrofitting to become, to raise its environmental credentials. Tall buildings, as we've heard, are expensive, both financially and environmentally, and in some quarters there is a growing vocal opposition to the existence of tall for the sake of tall buildings. Peter Rees, the Chief Planning Officer in the City of London, says you have to grow tall only when you need to go tall. And for big buildings that are fully glazed, the British architect Ken Shuttleworth, one of the original team of architects on the Gherkin, is an outspoken critic of the Shard and has forecast the death of the predominantly glazed tower. Of course, the argument regarding sustainability in tall buildings is a complex one, and there are many people here more qualified to speak about it than I. But both Hong Kong and New York have one of the lowest carbon footprints of any developed cities in the world because of their small size, high density, and consequent high public transport usage. Tall in these circumstances is not a vanity, but a necessity. And the environmental cost of construction and the potentially higher energy use of the building is a price worth paying in the interest of more efficient land use, increased densification, and a more efficient city. This is in direct contrast with the Burj Khalifa, and I don't mean to criticize the building, I think it's a fabulous building, but no such densification benefit exists, and where environmental benefits at all are harder to argue. In this case, any promoted or claimed sustainability features arguably exist only as marketing ornament. It is not appropriate for some buildings to climb on the sustainability bandwagon for the sake of appearance when there are too many great buildings that are pushing the boundaries of environmental performance for new super tools to get away with greenwash, and when there are great benefits that they have in themselves that don't necessarily relate to that. And I point to a couple of articles that I found online from fairly recently, which I don't think point to what stand out to make Burj Khalifa a fantastic building. But Burj Khalifa is an outstanding example of sustainable architecture, and the reason that the chap gives is sustainable architecture means creating designs that become buildings and objects whose values will also have meaning in the future, which I don't understand. And also, if you've got many people in a tall building, you will probably have one system to maintain it, and that's all good. And I don't think that stands out as being a benchmark of sustainability. And likewise, another article, Burj, a benchmark for sustainability, where 378 solar panels will heat water. And now I think that's fantastic, and it's absolutely right that that's in place. And again, I'm not criticizing the building, I'm criticizing the use of that as some way of selling it, because I don't think it's an appropriate message. It's the wrong message for the right building. So it's important to be it's very critical to communicate not only the value and benefit, but to be realistic about the shortcomings of buildings. Because the super tall building acts as a flag in the ground, an enormous statement of intent that covers a range of ambitions, and it presents an opportunity to make positive global statements that, if managed properly, can help to move the public consciousness forward, or if done so badly, can push it backwards. Are they socially inclusive or exclusive? Are they impact aware or impact oblivious? On a basic level, are they good buildings or are they bad buildings? All of these questions need to be addressed at the point of conception, not halfway through construction. Because the super tall is a logo. And this is the point. Super tall buildings are gigantic logos, brand identifiers for the countries that build them. They create a skyline, a marker, and a recognizable shape that help us remember, relate to, and form positive associations about a place. But they are also the most complex products on Earth, each one unique, with unique engineering and architectural challenges. Billions of parts stuck together with millimeter accuracy in sometimes harsh environments by thousands of people. Worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they will represent success or failure for dozens of organizations and thousands of workers. And after all of this complexity, they need to be sold. As offices, residents, okay, that's my joke slide came forward too soon. After they need to be sold. I mean, and this is the point. We need to sell them at the end of the day, as offices, residences, hotels, retail centres, or as all of the above. However tall, green, pointy, or twirly these buildings may be, they are really nothing more than lots of relatively small floor plates stacked vertically with complex vertical transportation and life safety strategies. But these brands are far more complicated and important than shampoo, cereals or cars, and have to be sold as such. So, what are the drivers for occupation? How do you go about selling those? Touching a little bit on what Nigel has talked about. Well, in each of the different markets that I've worked in, the drivers for occupation are always varied and surprising. Cost and efficiency are always a key for multinational businesses. ICC in Hong Kong is a classic example where a tall building of global stature, coupled with excellent transportation links and amenities, was able to overcome the traditional draw of the CBD in the Central District by offering a higher specification at a lower cost, refuting, as Nigel points out, the age-old adage of location, location, location. In Guangzhou recently, a story was told to me of a mainland business owner whose evaluation of the suitability of a building was limited to stepping out of his car at the base and staring up at the curvilinear distinctive shape of the tallest building in Guangzhou, nodding and signing the lease. For him, the value was in the reputation of the address rather than the value of the floor plate or the robustness of the power supply. An equally important choice, but a very different one. Similarly, in London, I heard of an occupier who paid a higher rent to go into Plantation Place here, a very good building, rather than, and this is the point where both of these buildings were just complete, a higher rent to go in here than to go into the Gherkin, on the basis that the Gherkin might appear to their shareholders to be a more expensive and perhaps a more frivolous destination, even if the opposite were true. So they paid more to go into somewhere so that it didn't look like they were paying more. And it just goes to show you the importance of the icon and what it says about businesses. And perhaps, therefore, there will be an icon backlash for businesses. In a changing market, one must be also aware of the many and varied sensitivities of the global and public company, who cannot afford to seem to be too frivolous. And I point out here 100 Bishopsgate in the middle, a collaboration between Allies and Morrison Woods Bagot for the developers GP and Brookfield, which is deliberately designed to be an antidote to the more stylish buildings around it and sold as such. For companies who cannot afford to be seen to be too frivolous or profligate and not get carried away by the vanity of some tall buildings. Tall buildings, importantly, can be deeply pragmatic, totally responsible, and absolutely appropriate architectural responses. Sometimes they don't need to be iconic or landmark or trophy. They can just be the best possible business decision. And it is important to realize this when this is the case and to communicate that properly. So with that all in mind, I've tried to put together a set of what I think are universal guidelines, the sort of nuts and bolts part of this presentation, and principles for communicating tall buildings that, although they won't buck a market or overcome a glut of space, can significantly and positively affect the effectiveness of a campaign to sell tall. So, number one, I think it's critical to remember that a tall building is owned by everyone, not just the developer, the architect, and the tenant. People who live and work in the city where it grows are just as important as the relatively small congregation of agents and occupiers. After all, it is the general public that will end up using, living in, or working in the building. And I think that the bigger the building, the more historic, the more important, the more that's true, the more people take it to heart. So you can't neglect these critical communications, even if it's limited to hoardings, as Nigel talked about, and billboards, making sure that people can understand what's happening and take it to heart. And it's a fascinating experience in London currently with the Shard now completing, that people love it. People really love it. And despite the fact there's been criticism in the press, in some areas of the press, critics like to kick up a fuss, but people love it. And people love to relate to buildings like this. And you need to give them that information, whether it's in stations and letting them know that they're going to be disrupted as the building is built, but also bringing them in to build up part of the brand and tell them what's going to be there. But also delivering websites that aren't just focused on leasing, but also deliver information for the general public, because people do like to learn about buildings. And also using technology like apps that are available on iTunes. This isn't at the moment, it will be shortly. Available on iTunes to be able to deliver the important information that both your customers want, but also your wider customer base. And as Nigel talked about, it's employees at the end of the day that everyone is trying to attract in office buildings. You need to be able to talk to them. They are members of the public as well. 2, a really tall building represents something, whether or not it is continuing preeminence, emerging prosperity, or unbridled ambition. And this should be represented in the brand and in the marketing. And this vision should be clearly articulated and communicated by the development team, preferably in advance of designing the building. It will make the creative process that much easier and the final design more appropriate. A post-rationalized, non-specific marketing campaign is much less effective. And ICC we've talked about a couple of times. When we went through our learning process, our research process with Nigel and with Sun Hung Kai, what came out of Sun Hung Kai's all the meetings was the idea of quality, of Sun Hung Kai quality, of ICC quality. It was absolutely fundamental to everything they did. And they said this has to be applied across everything. We are totally committed to quality. And the brand we came up with was designed to reflect quality. Now, there was lots of other messages behind that, but it was designed to reflect quality. With One World Trade Center, we have to accept that we know there are issues with the building, obviously, that may affect tenants. But actually, it's a totally historic product that people will be proud to be associated with. And we've tried to reflect that in the way that we've talked about it, in providing slightly more esoteric rather than prosaic terminology when describing the building and the aspects of it and the reasons why people will want to go there. Great photography and talking about a city as a whole rather than just the minutiae of office space. 100 Bishopsgate, at the converse of that, and you can't see that brilliantly well, is a building that's about functionality. And actually the whole campaign is based on delivering that message. It's just about, here is a floor plate. It works really well because of these reasons. And it's not trying to be more grandiose. 3, and as Nigel said again, quality in all things is a critical factor. If you can't make a great brochure, model, film, or marketing suite, how are you going to make a great or safe building? And that's how customers think. And I think it's absolute, again, it's so important that I talked about the quality at ICC, making sure that that flowed through everything, but also the fact that the stuff worked, the stuff, was excellent in the way that people dealt with it. And whether it's in marketing suites, because if you go into a building where the finishes aren't done properly, will people assume that your building won't be finished properly? If you give people often the first way that people come into contact with your building, with your brand, is through the marketing material. And they've got 2 seconds to make a decision about whether they believe your promise, whether they believe what you are telling them. And often it's the marketing material that is going to convince them. And that's true of residential, of commercial, of mixed use, of every part of it, particularly when you are selling the most prestigious projects in the world. And whether it's from commissioning the best landscape photographers and then adding to that the best computer-generated imagery, it's about delivering a message that is consistently of very, very high quality. And I'm afraid that means that you can't skimp on the marketing budget. As Nigel said, you cut corners there. People wonder, where else are you cutting corners? Where else are you skimping? Now, a slightly more technical one is, I think that we all here in this the world's largest collection of skyscraper geeks, understand all of this, the technical information, but most people have a great deal of difficulty transforming 2D plans on paper into 3D reality in their heads, and very few know the difference between a plan, an elevation, and a section. It is important that the plans are as simple as possible and are correctly oriented. Northwards is helpful, and that the supporting material enhances understanding of the plans. At the end of the day, all of this stuff, it's just, it comes down to the technical stuff. It comes down to floor plates and getting people into them, and you have to be able to deliver that information in a really, really simple way, making sure that, that bit of all the pretty pictures, it comes down to the importance of that and making sure that people can read them even when they're more complex plans, and also relating the plan to how you get into the building and how it fits into the marketing, into the main master plan, and how it fits into the city, how it relates to location and transportation, and using the technology that's available to be able to deliver that story in most compelling ways, using interactives and animations, using cutaways and illustrations to explain the difficult and complicated underground access, stuff that's clear and beautiful and simple. Again, using technology and drawings, the Shard has a number of different entrances, a very complex underground and train concourse, and talking to people and being able to use tools to help them understand that is key to it as well. Technical information, building, how you put on the specification, explain to people where it works, because a lot of the people you're dealing with have never dealt with buildings in this level of detail before. And this is another thing, that the project team, everybody here and everybody who's selling it, have dealt with these schemes for months, if not years. They know it inside out. They understand how it relates to the environment. Your customer only has minutes to understand the finished magnificence of the proposed building. Any assistance that you can give them to make that understanding easier will make selling easier. And that means films, fly-throughs, computer-generated images, models, wrong way, marketing suites, and well-thought-out films and animations and anything that you can do to make that scheme reality in people's minds. Again, beautiful imagery, fantastic CGIs, letting people understand how great it's going to look. And I think now, the CGIs that are coming out of lots of different companies over the world you cannot tell the difference. They really do give a fantastic view. And making them feel more real is a constant process of work and evaluation. Using technology, as I've said, and presentations delivered well, I think that's key. It's amazing to me how many people whose job it is to sell buildings do terrible presentations. And I think it's really important that don't be embarrassed about it. Learn, be taught how to give presentations. It's all important part of explaining the vision of these fantastic buildings. Safety and security is a great concern in all buildings, and particularly tall. Do not shy away from addressing the issues up front. And I think that Asia is particularly good, I think better than other places, about talking about elements of design that have come in to deal with seismic events, that talking about fire safety and refuges, and being able to not be embarrassed about that information but deliver it up front. And also all of the technical information. Now, one of the reasons why these are so exciting to sell, so exciting to talk about, why we like them, is because they are machines for living and working, and tall buildings are the ultimate machines. And I think with detail, excitement, technical superiority and safety, all of those aspects need to come out in the marketing. Getting excited about a core and an efficient core and why it works and why it makes a building better and why it makes that building stand out from all others. Being able to deliver lifting strategies in ways that people who don't understand lifting strategies can understand. Looking at how you develop and show floor plates and the way that buildings work effectively, transportation systems. And all of that information. And I think I'm coming to the end now, and it comes to back to the emotive. And the truth is that most people love to tell people that they work in a famous building. That business card pride is a powerful motive for both individuals and organizations. And understanding that emotive element to it is, I think, also key to telling the story and making people fall in love with the buildings. And the final is that, despite I've said super tools are logos and all that sort of stuff, a brand is not a logo. A brand is a promise that you make to the customer about what your product will deliver. The logo is just a simple way that people recognize your brand. You have to understand your and your building's brand and communicate it. And understanding it and getting it right in the beginning is critical. For most buildings, the customer only has one way of gauging the strength of your promise, until you build it, of course. And that is through you, your team, and your marketing material. So it needs to be right, and it needs to be as good as you want your building to be. If the brochure that they take home is flimsy, unintelligible, unmemorable, and falls apart in their hands, that will be their overriding memory, not what a fantastic project you have designed and are building for them. Thank you.